Good to go. So today's a really special day for the 330 Sports Show. Justin, I thank you for having me on. And it is our true honor today to speak with a legend of sports broadcasting. In his illustrious career spanning over 50 years, Verne Lundquist has been the soundtrack to some of the greatest sports moments in history. From the Dallas Cowboys radio network to the 16th Tower at Augusta National, Verne has called just about everything. The NFL, NBA, college basketball, including March Madness, college football, most notably the SEC on CBS from 2000 to 2016, golf, including the Masters and the PGA Championship, among other tournaments, and even the Winter Olympics, among many, many other sporting events around the world. He's even dabbled in Hollywood with his iconic role in Happy Gilmore, which he will be reprising in the upcoming Happy Gilmore 2 coming out next month. His style, famous catchphrases, and legendary calls have endeared himself to millions of sports fans around the globe, many who affectionately refer to him as Uncle Verne. So without further ado, it is our honor and privilege to welcome the great Verne Lundquist to the 330 Sports Show.
Thank you, guys. Great to be with you. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's our honor. We are truly grateful you are with us today. So thanks again for joining. So Greg, why don't you go ahead and lead off?
Yeah, so we touched base a few minutes before we got on, but your career spans so many years and so many sports. And by the way, I'll put a plug in for your book, Play by Play, which chronicles your life and career. It is incredibly well done, and I enjoyed it tremendously. We figured, we would start with really kind of the first big sportscasting gig you got, and that was working for the Dallas Cowboys radio network, and then ultimately becoming the voice of the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, how that came about, and what that meant for the rest of your career.
If I look back, getting the Cowboy assignment was by far the most significant event in my career. It's from that Tex Schramm was the guy who chose me, and everything sprouted from that. I moved to Dallas in 1967. I'm going to date myself. And I was 27 years old, and I had tried for the job at the ABC affiliate 2 different times, and I didn't get the job, and finally got it on my 3rd attempt. And the week I was there, the Cowboys called and said, this is highly unusual, but we'd like for you to be our guest on the charter to go to Washington, D.C. to play the Redskins, now the Commanders, of course. And en route, Tex Schramm came up to me and said, we normally hire a local guy to do our postgame show, but you're on the charter with us. We'd like for you to do the postgame show. So that was my introduction to the Cowboy Radio Network. And I was the pregame, postgame, and halftime host from 67 to 70. And then one of the greatest sports writers ever, the legendary late Blackie Sherrod, was the color guy, and Bill Mercer was the play-by-play guy. And Blackie decided in 1970 he'd had enough of the travel. So Tex promoted me to the, I wouldn't say analyst, I was the color guy. And then Bill Mercer, who was the play-by-play guy, had always wanted to do Major League Baseball. So when the Washington Senators moved to Arlington and became the Texas Rangers, Bill took that job, and Tex promoted me to play-by-play. As a side note, I had never, ever, ever done play-by-play. And I said, Tex, he said, I know that. He said, but I think you can handle it. And so my first ever play-by-play job was the Cowboys against the old college All-Stars in Chicago. And I'll guarantee I was nervous as a cat. I mean, but I got through it. But just to backtrack a moment, in my role as the pregame, postgame, halftime guy, I was at the famous Ice Bowl game in Green Bay, Wisconsin, on December 31st, and I had no job until the postgame once we got in the second half. And I remember the wake-up call I got at the Northland Hotel. First of all, let me further backtrack. On Friday, you can't imagine how simple things were. But Vince Lombardi, agreed to meet with the Dallas media alone. That's how simple it was.
Wow.
And there were eight writers from 3 Dallas newspapers, 1 Fort Worth, and 2 Dallas newspapers, and they had allowed me to come along and bring a photographer. And so pre-arrangement, I had arranged with Chuck Lane, the SID, to do an interview with Coach Lombardi. And when that time came, he got up and excused himself, and I looked at Chuck and I said, Lombardi, I've got a photographer down on the field, we're set to go. And Lombardi came back in, he said, I don't do television without a coat and tie. And I said, Coach, if it'll make you feel more comfortable, here goes my coat and tie. And he said, okay, let's go. So we went down the elevator. The late Jack Murray was my photographer. He was wedding film, not videotape. And the topic of conversation for about 2 minutes was the recent installation of an electric grid under the frozen tundra so that the frozen tundra would never freeze. And that ran on a Saturday night at the ABC affiliate in Dallas. And then the wake-up call Sunday morning was, good morning, Mr. Lundquist. It's 7:30 and 13 below zero.
Oh, jeez.
And it got down to 20 below before the game was over. And the wind chill factor was off the chart. Anyway, from that Cowboy assignment, everything sprang. And Tex, I'm looking over, if I go back in that corner of all this memorabilia back here, there's a photograph of Tex and his late one. Both Tex and his wife have gone now, Tex and Marty Schramm, and my wife Nancy and me. But Tex, if I look back at the single most important influence in my professional career, it would be Tex Schramm.
That's great. So Verne, you had mentioned obviously your big break was with the Cowboys. Talk to us a little bit about like some of your interactions with obviously maybe some of the players, but obviously Coach Landry.
I figured out. I joined the Cowboys pregame, postgame in '67, and I became play-by-play guy in '72, and I left to go to CBS in '83. And over the course of that time, I probably took 150 charters. Originally with the old Braniff Airlines, now long gone, and then with American Airlines. And I got to know Tom Landry really, really well. And his routine never ever changed. Win, lose, heartbreaking loss, rout one way or the other. And he would always be served first. He and his wife Alicia it was 727. And so they sat on the right side behind the owner, Clint Murkison, and his wife, and Tom and Alicia on the right side. He'd get served first. He would always have one glass of Chardonnay, never more than that. And then he would get up and go to the back of the plane and make his way. And the way the charter was divided, coaches and front office personnel sat in first class. There were 9 rows for media, and then a curtain, and behind those 9 rows, aisle and window for every player. Nobody had to sit in the middle except Dwayne Thomas, who chose to sit there, but that's a whole different story. And Tom would go back and start at the back and say something to almost every player, and then make his way back into first class, sit down, and open a Louis L'Amour novel. He was a Western writer. It was always a paperback, and that over 150 charters, I never saw that change. And I got to know Tom quite well, and I really, I don't want to say loved the guy, but I admired him so much because, the great stone face, the man in the hat. But we had one guy on my staff at the ABC affiliate in Dallas. His name was Jerry Orr, and we could send him out to Valley Ranch, was where the Cowboy headquarters were then, and he could always get Tom to smile. Darndest thing I've ever seen. And but Tom was very patient with all of us. He was an admirable human being, really. And Alicia, his wife just died about 3 years ago. Tom succumbed to leukemia, and he was only in his 70s. And I think the saddest day I ever saw was when Jerry Jones bought the team and fired Tom. That was heartbreaking.
Incidentally, Verne, are you a Cowboys fan to this day?
Kind of. Yeah. Yes, I am. Current ownership makes that a bit of a problem for me.
We have that problem here in Cleveland too.
Yeah, I was going to say it beats being a Browns fan.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I got to tell you a story about doing a game in Cleveland. Holy cow! In the old municipal stadium, the visiting radio booth was up on the top of the roof, and boy, when that in November, December, when that wind started blowing in from Lake Erie. Oh my gosh! And I can remember one of the more vivid scenes I remember from Cleveland was they were beaten by the Browns. The Cowboys were, and Don Meredith had a horrible day, and Landry replaced him with Craig Morton, and I was doing postgame show, so I came down. They came to get me, and I was on the sideline. And you guys are too young to remember that there was an old bench that went the length, 30 to 30. And Don Meredith was standing on that bench with a cape around him because it was really cold. And Schramm walked up and gave him a hug. And then when we got back on the charter, the Cowboys lost, Don sat in the very last row. And that old 727 had an exit ramp that came down from the back. And before the team, they closed that ramp, Don looked across the aisle at Pete Gent, a close friend and a novelist, by the way. He wrote North Dallas 40. And he said, "Let's go." And they got off the plane and somehow caught a ride or caught a charter, I don't know which, and went to New York and hung out with Frank Gifford. And that was the last game Don Meredith ever played for the Cowboys.
Interesting.
Wow. So one more before we jump into another topic. I'd be remiss, I guess, if we didn't talk about. I mean, you're obviously famous for your iconic calls. You have so many. Am I correct in saying that your first one may have occurred during Super Bowl 13 as the voice of the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Jackie Smith. Let me give you a backdrop of that because this is 1978, right? I think it was 79.
I think so.
God, the memory gets a little shaky at this age. We had just developed the ability to go live from a remote location. And Texram, along with Pete Rozelle, believe it or not, and Frank Gifford, the three of them, had purchased a marina in Key West. And a part of the deal was a yacht that the three of them got to share. So Tex had brought that thing up with his captain, and they'd parked it on Pier 66. And so I asked Jackie and his wife to go live on our 10 o'clock newscast on a Wednesday night. This was before the Sunday game. And Jackie had a Hall of Fame career with the Cardinals, and he was in the last year of his football playing career. And I asked him how he wanted to be remembered, what would be a nice way to go out. And he said, I'd love to make a meaningful catch in a Cowboy victory. So now he's wide open in the end zone. Roger will tell you now, Roger Staubach, that they had practiced that play, Jackie Smith, post pattern, from the 5-yard line in, and this was called on 3rd and goal from the 11-yard line. Mm-hmm. And Roger looked over to the side and said to Tom, he yelled at Tom, he said, no, no, no. And Tom said, run the play. And so Roger will tell you that instead of drilling it, he took a little bit off. and that disrupted the timing, and Jackie dropped it. And that's when I said, bless his heart, he's got to be the sickest man in America, because I was so empathetic for what he had said about wanting to make a meaningful catch. Now, the tragedy in my mind is that he never, ever accepted a chance to come back to a reunion with the Cowboy team. Very sad. Very, very sad.
Yeah, it's such a almost painful paradox, right? That it was sort of the call that launched your career, and it was just a moment that was very difficult for him. And ironically enough, I don't know if you recall this year, Verne, there was the divisional playoff between the Ravens and the Bills. Ravens scored a touchdown late in the game to get within a 2-point conversion. Lamar Jackson rolled out. Mark Andrews, wide open at the goal line, drops a pass, falls to the seat of his pants. Immediately when I saw that, I thought of the Jackie Smith play, because it was very similar. And I thought I was I thought I was so creative. And then I went to YouTube to watch your Jackie Smith call again, and there's all these comments that say, Mark Andrews brought me here, Mark Andrews brought me here. So a lot of people made that same connection immediately, and it was a very similar looking play.
Yeah. So. Well, let's jump ahead a little bit. I want to go all the way to the 1992 March Madness Regional. Of course, Duke, Kentucky, and I've had the pleasure of meeting Christian Laettner in person. Probably the largest human being I've ever met in person. But that call, that play, that game, and your call, and I believe you were on the call with Len Elmore, if I'm not mistaken. But walk us through a little bit of that game, or your memories of that play call, and how it was all drawn up.
Well, I've got so many memories of that, because it's still regarded by many as the greatest college game ever played. Although when who was the guy from Butler, almost sank one from midcourt.
Hayward.
Oh, yeah.
Gordon Hayward. And had that gone in, I think I'm second. I mean, Duke, Kentucky's in second place. Let me provide a real backdrop to you. I was doing the Cowboys, and they had a number 1 draft choice out of Yale in 1969 named Calvin Hill. And Calvin and his wife, Janet, became really, really good friends of mine. And I knew that Janet was expecting. So I said to her, to Calvin rather, when she gives birth, let me know. I'd like to announce it, because he was so popular in town. I'd like to announce it on our 10 o'clock news. So on October 5th, 1972, I announced the birth of Grant Henry Hill on my 10 o'clock. Now, that was a Friday. On Sunday, the Cowboys were playing the hated Pittsburgh Steelers. And with less than a minute to go, Calvin took a toss from Staubach, went out to his right, pulled up, and hit a diving Lance Rensel in the end zone for a touchdown, and the Cowboys won. Now fast forward to September 28th, 1992. Here's Grant Hill, unguarded. Pitino chose not to guard him, and I still think. And first of all, just a little background. They were playing Kentucky, coached by Rick Pitino. They had 4. They call them the Untouchables. Unrecruited, and then one guy, Jamal Mashburn, who was a really, really good player. And when Sean Woods hit a miraculous bank shot over Christian Laettner, by the way, it went in, and all 5 of the Duke guys went timeout, 2.1 seconds to go. And they had tried this same play from Grant Hill to Laettner earlier against Wake Forest, and Grant put too much spin on the ball, and it went out of bounds. So Krzyzewski looked at Grant and he said, "Can you make the pass this time?" And Grant said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Laettner, can you catch it?" And he said, "Of course I can." He was not shy. and he'd had a perfect game so far. And so obviously they connected. But in my mind, I'm going back, and I got to tell this story before we left the air about Calvin throwing that pass, the winning touchdown against Pittsburgh. Here's his son, who's now 6'9", and he throws the pass. Leitner had the presence of mind to take a step to his right and then turn around and launched it and went in. And it's still, he was 10 for 10 from the free throws, 10 for 10 from the field, and had 7 rebounds, and should have been ejected from the game.
Oh, right.
Midway in the second half, he put his size 14 in the midsection of a sub for Kentucky named Aminu Timberlake. And Lenny Elmore said, I'm not sure he intended to do that. And I said, yes, he did. and so on the 20th anniversary, they invited us back to New York, Lenny, myself, and Christian. They rented the suite in the Waldorf Astoria, for crying out loud, and they videotaped the 3 of us watching the game. And when we got to Aminu Timberlake, Christian looked at me and said, I just knew you guys were going to show that. I think we kind of had to, because you probably should have been given the hook. But it was the greatest performance I think I've ever seen, and it still stands up. And I was doing a radio talk show with a guy in Atlanta once, and because all I said when it went in was, yay! And he said, are you really proud of that call? I said, well, I'm proud of the game, but the call, I channeled my inner Marv Albert and let it go. But the funny thing is, I thought that Lenny and I had done a good job, and I didn't allow myself to watch the videotape. Now I'm working in Minneapolis regionals. We were getting ready to do Marquette and Kentucky, and I was working with my best friend of all the partners I've had, Billy Raftery. And Bill called me and he said, they're showing the game on ESPN Classic. You need to watch. And so that was the first time I'd ever seen it. I picked it up midway through the first half. And I must tell you, I thought, okay. Now, we had Leslie Visser with us, Lenny, myself, and Leslie, Hall of Fame broadcaster, still a dear, dear friend. And we had her station about 20 feet from the Kentucky play-by-play guy, Kaywood Ledford. 39 years as a voice of the Wildcats. He had announced whenever they lost or if they won the national championship, that would be his final broadcast. And Leslie never got on the air because the game was so compelling. In the aftermath of it, here's Mike out in the middle and the chaos and the celebration. But instead of going to Bob Harris, the Duke radio play-by-play guy, he peeled off one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And he peeled off and he went and sat down with Kaywood Ledford and thanked him for everything that Kaywood had done for the sport that they both loved. It was a really classy thing that he did.
Wow.
That's what I love as much as the game sometimes is the story behind what actually happened, like what you don't see on TV. So yeah, that's great information. I love that.
Well, we're storytellers, I think. Yes, down distance, yardage, how many is he 7 for 10 from the field? All of that is very important. But essentially, you attract an audience by telling stories, sometimes negative, but about the players, about the coaches. You tell them to give them a reason to be invested in the outcome. And I think it works. It brings the viewer in. And, I think you need to practice the art of telling stories.
For sure.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great, you mentioned Bill Raftery, and that actually we got our little play sheet here of potential topics, and Bill is one of the topics, because I know that you two do have a special relationship, and it came through in your broadcast. And in fact, we have written down here that it would always felt like you guys, when you would call a game together, it would be like two buddies hanging out in the basement on the couch, drinking a beer, watching a ball game.
I'm looking back over my shoulder. I've got an 8x10 of Billy and me. He is the closest friend I've got, and we talk at least once a month. But let me tell you a little story about Bill and me. we met for the first time in February of 1983. We were assigned a game in South Carolina, highly anticipated in a regional contest between the University of Idaho Vandals and the South Carolina Gamecocks. I mean, America was breathless with anticipation. So we did the game, and we got along just famously. And we were assigned back there the next week for a game that did have a lot of interest. It was Marquette with this young junior All-American named Doc Rivers and South Carolina. And Billy said, listen, this was so great. Why don't you bring your wife, Nancy? I'll bring Joni, and I'll just bet we hit it off. Well, we did, the four of us. And Bill got a call, and I got a call. The culprit was a guy named Kevin O'Malley, who ultimately had a lot to do with my career, too. But Kevin said, you guys sounded just great together. We can't wait to hear you again. This was 1983. The next time we worked together was 2000. 17 years. And wow. that's why Bill was not on the call for the Duke Kentucky game. That's why Lenny Elmore did it. But then we finally got back together, and we were together for 15 years after that. And I treasure his friendship. We talk at least once a month, and he is a grand fella. And I just think what he's done with Iron Eagle, who, by the way, is a brilliant broadcaster, and combo of Ian and Grant Hill, and doing the final four is really an outstanding group.
Well, yeah, Greg and I are both Ohio State Buckeye graduates, and you've been on the call for a couple of those, maybe even heartbreakers for us. I think the Dayton call I can remember, but the one that got me was the Siena. You got the double onions.
Yeah, you did. And I used to do a lot of public speaking, and I used a lot of video, and that double onions is in there. The setup is, Billy with his pet phrases, and I love to play the Ohio State Vienna, and Ron Moore, and onions double order. Oh my God! I mean, he's got a way, doesn't he?
Oh yeah,
he's unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
Greg, I'm going to give you the next topic.
Yeah, I don't know. Before we leave college basketball, is there anything else? I got a couple of things down, but yeah, I think we can, in the interest of time, move on. You got any more college basketball we missed that you want to?
Not really. I mean, I did a lot of. I did the NBA too, and worked with a lot of. Billy Cunningham was a great broadcast partner and friend, but when you're at it, I mean, I started. I'm going to be 85 next month, okay, and I'm upright. Yeah. Oh, yes, sir.
And your memory is unbelievable. I mean, truly.
I appreciate that, but you haven't seen me when I can't remember what I had for breakfast. Well,
my dad says that all the time too. But the names and the details are just truly unbelievable. And it's
no, I've done. Somebody figured it out. There's 20 different sports.
You know what? I actually heard Vin Scully, of all people, say that about you. He said, I wonder if Verne can remember every one of the 20 sports he's ever called.
He said, I was blessed. I got the Vin Scully Award, and it was back in New York, and Vin didn't travel then. And so he taped a segment and intro. And this award, by the way, is presented by his alma mater, Fordham University. And so he taped the intro from Dodger Stadium, and he said, your resume said you've done 20 sports. Name them. and I will admit now that some of them were resume fillers back when I was a young broadcaster. I mean, I actually did archery. What do you say there? He missed it.
And you did something. What did you do in Russia? That was in your book.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I did amateur. I've done events in Leningrad or St. Petersburg. And I did, when I was still at ABC, I did in 3 months boxing in Yokohama, Japan, boxing in Moscow in January 1980, U.S. versus USSR amateur, and then boxing in East Germany. We were the first live telecast out of East Germany. But that was December, January, February. And then at the end of February, I got a call from Chuck Howard, and it's one of those, we're going to move in a different direction. So good luck to the rest of your life. Man.
Well, you made out okay.
Yeah, it all worked out. But I mean, we all get that at some point, and I got it. And I'll share a little story about Chuck. He's passed away now, but he was a dictator, and he worked for Roone Arledge. And at ABC, it was survival of the fittest. I mean, it was really Darwinian. And how's this for a lineup? At one point, our college football lineup was Keith Jackson, Chris Schenkel, Al Michaels, and I was the fourth guy.
Wow.
Yeah. Pretty impressive. But anyway, I couldn't wait. Someday I was gonna see Chuck Howard, and boy, I was gonna tell him off to his face. And I was in LA at the Tom Bradley International Terminal, American Airlines. I was taking the escalator way, way, way down. And when I was halfway down, and I saw a guy. He was dressed in what passed as a formal outfit for ABC. He had lime green slacks, Gucci loafers with no socks, and I said, "That's got to be somebody from ABC." And I got there, and it was Chuck Howard, and I was just, I'm going to do it. And Chuck looked at me and he said, "Before you say a word, I've got to make judgment calls in my position, and sometimes I make mistakes. And in your case, I made a huge mistake, and I'm sorry." Well, that disarmed me. There's nothing I could say.
Wow.
And it was very big of him, and it meant the world to me that he said that. So
fascinating. Yeah, this is great. So I guess a good segue, because we've talked about now your overseas adventures, and a lot of people may not recall that you called a few Winter Olympics, and also possibly, I would say, one of the biggest sports meets real life dramatic situations maybe in recent memory. So can you talk a little bit about your time calling the Winter Olympics?
Oh gosh, yes. Now, my wife and I live in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. We are a major ski resort. We're in northwestern Colorado. We're 40 miles from the Wyoming border. And if you go north to south, it's Steamboat, Vail, Aspen, Telluride. And I learned to ski. I came here for the first time when I was 31 years old and fell in love with the place. And my ski instructor was a guy named Billy Kidd, who was the first medalist in an alpine event for the United States in 64. And I learned to ski from Billy Kidd. So when we got the call that we had been awarded the rights to the 1992 Winter Olympics, a group of us were in the Pebble Beach area at a symposium organized by John Madden, because John had the clout. We don't talk enough football. So we went out and played golf and lied in these meetings about how we prepared. We start Monday morning at 9. Anyway, I got a call and they said, "We've got the Winter Olympics and we got your assignment." And I, all right. I said, "You're going to do figure skating." What? And Nancy, my wife, was a voice major at the University of Texas, and she still has a beautiful voice. And she also did a lot of commercial work. And she looked at me and she said, "Get down off your high horse. You love music, you love athleticism, you love competition. This is a combination of all. You're really going to like it." So I was assigned to the Winter Olympics in Albertville, France. That was our first one. in '92. But to get ready for it, they had us do, and I was assigned to work with Scott Hamilton, who's still a dear, dear friend of mine. Scotty lives with his wife and his two kids, Max and Aiden, his two sons, in suburban Nashville now. And but Scotty realized right away that I did not know squat his sport. And so we worked out a system. And our very first event of consequence was in Leningrad, then St. Petersburg. And it was the European Figure Skating Championship. And we did a rehearsal, and Scott said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Hey, because you would go to the practices, and you watch them, and they give you what they call a jump sheet: skate, triple axel, skate, double toe, whatever." And we'd watch this. Well, Scott knew I didn't know anything, so we worked out a system. And if something significant was going to happen, he would reach his right arm over and touch me on my right forearm, and that meant just shut. And we got through the Winter Olympics that way. And then by the time we got to Lillehammer in '94, I was a smart ass. I thought I knew something about his sport, but that was a clown show in Lillehammer. And I'll tell you my most vivid memory, we were going to Detroit as observers. That's the greatest credential you can get. I mean, you have full access and you don't have to work. You watch. And I flew into Detroit in a snowstorm. It wasn't a blizzard because planes landing and taking off. But I got there about 6 o'clock, but I'd been flying all day. And I got the rental car, was headed to the Westin Hotel, and I turned in WJR radio, and I hear this news guy say, "And here's the latest on the attack on Nancy Kerrigan." And that was the first I'd heard about what happened. That some guy had come with an iron crowbar and whacked her across her left thigh in hopes of breaking her leg and thus eliminating Tonya Harding's most consequential opponent. So when I got to the Westin, they had a buffet dinner. The International or the U.S. Figure Skating Association had a buffet dinner, and I talked to a member of the USFSA staff, and he said, "When we get to the bottom of this, and we will, I'll guarantee you Tonya Harding is going to be involved." Well, that was January 6th of '94, and it took her 6 weeks, and Nancy had to try out in front of judges to prove that she could compete. Meanwhile, the legal system made its way through, and Harding appealed and won the appeal, so she was placed on the team. Now, by the time we get to actually in Hamar, about 30 miles south of Lillehammer, by the time we get there, it was a clown show. And CBS was complicit in pounding up of it all. Connie Chung was then co-anchor of the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather, who was back in New York. Connie Chung flew to Portland and got on the same plane as Tonya Harding. They flew Portland, Chicago, Amsterdam, Oslo, and Connie was there the whole way. Now, the afternoon that the two ladies took to the practice ice, there were only two legitimate English-speaking broadcasters, us and the Canadian Broadcasting Company. And there were 400 print journalists who were over talking to Nancy Kerrigan's coaches. And I looked down, and so help me God, I can almost tell you their names. There were 6 CBS broadcast units, a reporter, a sound man, and a videographer around the arena. Susan Spencer, John Blackstone, I can't remember all of them, but right below us was Connie Chung, co-anchoring the evening news. And Scott was livid. And he said, someone has lost track of the fact that these young men and women have worked all their lives, however short those lives were, to compete and win a medal at the Olympic Games. And it was a clown show. And then, of course, Tonya competed, and she finished 8th, I think, in the short program. Nancy Kerrigan was first. For the long program, we were going to showcase Tonya, get her scores, and get her off the ice. And that's when we had a backstage little lipstick camera, they called it, down the hallway. And all of a sudden she's out, and her bootlace broke. And off camera, Scott said, "This never happens at the Olympics. She's hijacked the games." And she went out, and of course her bootlace didn't hold. And she went over and put her leg up on it was awful. And she was granted a reskate. And that affected the skaters who followed her. Anyway, she wound up finishing 10th. And Kerrigan, this little sprite from Dnipropetrovsk, Ukraine, Oksana Bayul threw in an extra triple jump, and she beat Kerrigan by 1/10 of 1 point to win the gold medal. So really, really, really memorable. And it's still the highest rated non-Super Bowl sports broadcast ever. If you don't think hype works, the estimated audience then, it's been downsized since, was 126 million viewers.
Wow.
That's truly incredible.
Yeah. That's actually a great trivia question for anybody. What's the highest rated Super Bowl sporting event?
And I'm reasonably certain that it still exists, that it still is.
That's fantastic.
And you had a line in that call where you said this bizarre real life movie continues, and you turned out to be a soothsayer on that, because they ended up making a movie about the whole thing a few years back.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Yeah.
And you probably never fancied yourself being parodied on Saturday Night Live when you started your announcing career. But speaking of the clown show you speak of, carried over to you being in the cold open of Saturday Night Live as Phil Hartman parodying Verne Lundquist. So how about that?
It was, I've seen that 500 times, and I still laugh. It was Phil Hartman played me with just the right degree of sanctimony. Dana Carvey just nailed Scott. And Julia Sweeney played Tracy Wilson. And the skater was Luke Beverly Hills 90210.
Yeah.
Jason Priest. And they shot that at a rink that they hired in somewhere on the east side of New York City. And I've seen it. I closed, when I still did a lot of public speaking, I used a lot of video, and I closed every one with that. It runs 4 minutes and 14 seconds. And I laugh every time. When he's prone on the ice and honest to God, it's and Scotty, when they showed it, Scott, we're in France, right? And before we started, Scotty said, "Well, I don't feel any pressure. All I'm doing is replacing Dick Button." And I said, "No pressure on me. All I'm doing is replacing Jim McKay. Other than that, still a walk in the park." Pat O'Brien had a late night show, and Scotty was the guest on the late night show, and they showed that clip. And Pat came out and said, "I think you're prouder of that than winning the gold medal in Sarajevo." He said, "In a way, I am." But it stands the test of time.
And there was even another one Greg had sent me this morning with Chris Farley and Nancy Kerrigan.
That's great, yeah.
And that one, like you said, you could watch it 500 times and I'm still laughing. But
yeah. Apparently they did one. I've never seen it, but apparently Will Ferrell played me in one.
Jeez.
From Nagano, Japan. And
okay.
Yeah.
We'll have to
holy cow. If you're going to have a guy play you, having Phil Hartman and Will Ferrell, that's pretty good company.
Yeah. Well, so sticking with the pop culture theme, we had talked about this before you came on air, but that's a perfect segue to a movie you are reprising your role in, where you play yourself, Happy Gilmore 2. One of the top 5 funniest movies of all time. So you want to talk a little bit about your role in Happy Gilmore?
Yeah, I sure will. We we filmed the original in Vancouver, British Columbia, and just a backstory. My agent was a guy named Bob Rosen, and he passed away back in February. But I had Bob, and all the CBS golf announcers used Bob, Pat Summerall, Ben Wright. I mean, on and on and on. And so I got a call from Rosen. He said, they're doing this movie in Vancouver. It's a spoof on golf. I'm not sure if you're interested, but I told him you'd come up there. So I went up, and when I saw the original script, they had tried to white out Pat Summerall's name, but he was the original guy, and he said no. So I got the part. Now, at the morning of the shoot, it was 7 a.m., and we're all gathered around, and the director was a fellow named Dennis Dugan, and Dennis played the commissioner of the PGA Tour, and he's in the sequel, but he's not playing a commissioner. Anyway, this good-looking guy named Jack Jarputo was standing there, and he was Adam Sandler's roommate at New York University Film School. So Dennis looked at Jack, and he said, go back to hair and makeup, get a blue sport coat, and I want you to sit next to Verne in every scene, but you cannot say a word because you're not a member of the Screen Actors Guild. So Jack sat there. He's a really good-looking guy, and he's the one to whom I said, who the hell is Happy Gilmore? And that's the punchline. I mean, anyway, Jack is now executive producer of all of Adam Sandler's movies. And so we did the video, the film, my part of it, in New Jersey back in November. So I know bits and pieces. And I do know that every golfer you've ever heard of, with the exception of Tiger Woods, is in the movie. And Tiger said no. But Jack Nicklaus is in it. Nick Faldo is in it. Freddie Couples is in it. Lee Trevino is back in it. And every current golfer in the world, Rory, McIlroy, Scotty Scheffler, on and on. And then I guess I'm okay. There's this country artist who used to be a hip hop artist, and I didn't know. I'm so out of touch with culture these days, but his name is Post Malone, and he is the whole second half of the show is this ridiculously funny send up of Live Golf.
Oh wow!
And it is a riot. So the premiere, it goes right to Netflix, and it's out on July 25th. Ironically enough, Nancy, my wife, and I are very involved in Steamboat Springs Summer Music Festival, and we had a dinner for donors 2 nights ago. And so this movie came up, and I've got a picture of Post Malone, myself, Adam Sandler, and Jack Jarputo, and the outfits that we wear are off the charts ridiculous. and anyway, they are going to have the movie, and it's going right to Netflix. So we were at this event 2 nights ago, and we've got this beautiful music pavilion here, seats 500, and it's acoustically just a brilliant place. And we were talking about the sequel, Happy Gilmore 2, and the chairman of board of our music festival said, well, we should have a viewing party. So we can't charge admission, but by invitation, we're going to have people and lower large screens, and about 125 of us are going to watch Happy Gilmore 2 on Netflix on July 25th.
That's fantastic.
What a world. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Greg, I'll let you go ahead.
All right, no, this is great, and we're trying to be cognizant of time, but we got the two biggest heavy hitting topics left to go, so we're going to jump right into college football. And this is the 330 Sports Show, so we are based in the Youngstown, Ohio area. Not too far from Youngstown, Ohio is Kent, Ohio, and that place has some significance to you, Verne, doesn't it?
Yeah, does it ever? 1974. I was at ABC, and the first telecast I ever got to do of a football game, I got a call from Chuck Howard, and he said, "We're going to give you your first football game, and you're going to do Ohio University at Kent State." And there was a fellow who just retired, I believe, named Sal Marciano, and he was. I didn't know this at the time, but they were pitting Sal and myself, and whoever was chosen would go on to be part of the regular rotation. But I was in Kent State, and Don James was the head coach, and I looked at the list of graduate assistants, and there was this guy named Nick Saban, who was a GA, and Nick and I have become really, really good friends. He's one of the guys, I've got his cell phone number and he'll answer it. But who knew then, right? And so Nick's intent at the time was to wait for his fiancee, now his wife, the lovely person he calls Miss Terry, and he was going to go back and run his dad's gas station in Fairmont, West Virginia. But he was a GA coaching defensive backs, and he kind of got the bug during that year, and went on to some renown as, in my view, the greatest college football coach that ever lived. I mean, what he's done is amazing. And when I got to know him so well, because we did so many Alabama games, I saw the side of Nick that he now lets come forward on game day. He was so rough with the media when he was the head coach, but he used to do a show on Thursday nights, and I was a guest on the show a couple of times, and he'd go into the audience during commercial breaks and sign autographs and take pictures, and then he'd come back and he was very affable on that show, and but he doesn't suffer fools. And sometimes the local media, in his view, were fools. And I said, Nick, why? Come on. And his assistant AD then, a guy named Jeff Purinton, said, well, he does that because they deserve it. I said, but now he's the guy that I know on game day.
Yeah,
he's so knowledgeable and so easy, and he's got a real sense of humor. So anyway, Nick and I have had, I've really met him for the first time when he was on Belichick's staff as a defensive coordinator with the Cleveland Browns. And we got talking on the sidelines, and little did I know then, Toledo, Michigan State, LSU. And then, of course, I met him at LSU. And but we really got to know him well during all his years at Alabama. And in my view, he is the greatest coach ever. And but I love watching him on game day now because that's a guy that I recognize.
Yeah, and it's hard to argue with the championships, and the numbers kind of speak for themselves. I can't really argue with that. So that's a great segue into, I believe am I paraphrasing this right, that you said maybe your most rewarding assignment in your career, calling the SEC on CBS from 2000 to 2016.
And I didn't want to do it. I did not want to do it. I mean, I was number 2 in the NFL, and life is good if you're the number 2 guy in the NFL. It's really, really good. You got nonstop flights. You stay in really nice hotels, and all of a sudden, I began hearing rumors. This was in '99 that Dick Enberg was unhappy at NBC, and he thought they were paying too much attention to this young whippersnapper named Bob Costas, who's the brightest guy I've ever met, by the way, and has become a good friend over the years. And Dick and I became really good friends. But I called Sean McManus, and I said, I keep hearing these rumors about Enberg being unhappy. And the guy who tipped me off was Pat Hayden, who was a former partner of mine and was doing Notre Dame games with Dick for NBC. And Pat said, he really doesn't like it over here. And so I called Sean McManus. And for those of you who might not know, Sean's father was Jim McKay.
Oh, wow. I didn't
Sean was adopted, and Jim McKay's real name was Jim McManus. And anyway, that's a long story. He was in Baltimore. He got offered to go to New York, and there was a game show called The Real McKay, and they asked him to host it. So he changed his name from McManus to McKay. That's a sidebar. So Sean called, and we're still really good friends. He was my boss, yes, but I'd known him forever, and we had a wonderful relationship, still do. And he said, I called him, and I said, I've got a heads up about Dick Enberg. Now, there's no way that would affect me, is there? And he said, no. Dick's a high-ticket guy. He said, I don't think we can afford to hire him. And then he said, in the unlikely event that we were to pursue and hire Dick Enberg, how would you feel about making the move to college football? So I said the appropriate things, and Nancy and I were in the kitchen right up here. And I hung up and I looked at Nance and I said, honey, pack our bags for Tuscaloosa. I knew it was a done deal. And my first game ever was Florida, Tennessee in September of 2000. Our sideline reporter was Jill Arrington. My partner was Todd Blackledge. And at the end of the game, almost 30 seconds to go, Jesse Palmer hit Jabbar Gaffney in the end zone with a touchdown that should or should not have counted. But the side judge went, whoop, and it counted 4-1. Jesse Palmer, who later became the Bachelor. And so we got off the air, and I looked at Todd, and I said, are they all like this? And he said, enough of them. And indeed they were. And there's nothing that approaches my regard for college football like doing the SEC. And I was desperately sad when CBS lost the rights. It's a matter of rights fees, and they couldn't come up with it. But 17 years, and I worked with Todd for 6, and then with Kerry for the last 11. I'm smiling. I'm looking down here at a thing I'll show you here in a minute. There could be no two more disparate personalities than Gary Danielson and me. We just come at life from different angles, but we got along famously. 11 years. He's the greatest football analyst I think with whom I've ever worked, and he prepares. My God, does he prepare? And he still does. But when I retired in 2016, we were in Atlanta getting ready to have dinner at this famous restaurant. They were throwing a little bit goodbye party, and Gary said, he told a story about we were in Tuscaloosa, and it was a 2-tiered booth, and Gary allowed himself 2 hours before the game to be interviewed by the Birmingham Herald, and he's doing this, and I'm up here saying hello to folks that drop by and SIDs and newspaper and radio, TV guys. And Gary told the writer, he said, look at him. I would no sooner do that than put an ice pick in my eye. And it made the article. So when I retired, Gary gave me this.
Oh, jeez.
It's a nice.
Oh, my God.
Verne and Gary.
Unbelievable.
That's so great.
I keep it right here. So I can always look down at it.
That's phenomenal. Verne, like so much of America is football. It's the number one sport in America, whether it's the NFL. College football is probably right up there if it's not number one, right now. But so much of our Saturdays, we heard you and Gary doing these phenomenal games in, arguably the best conference and the best teams in college football. We could go through all the lists of games. I think I know my favorite game that you've called, but what would be your favorite game of all those SEC games that you ever called?
That's an easy call. It's got to be 2013 Iron Bowl. But there's a setup. 2 weeks prior to that, we were doing Georgia Auburn, and Auburn had one loss for the year, and they were playing Georgia, and they had a 4th down and 18 in Auburn. The game was in Auburn, and this quarterback named Nick Marshall, 4th and 18, he just heaves up the ultimate Hail Mary. And there were 2 defensive backs for Georgia back. It's 4th and 18, knocked the ball down. Mm-hmm. They both went for the interception, and the ball tipped forward, and a wide receiver named Ricardo Lewis leaned back, made a heck of a catch, and strolled in untouched. And Auburn won. And Gary on the on-camera said, that is the greatest finish to any college football game I have ever seen. You'll never, ever. 2 weeks. And we're doing the Iron Bowl. And so the Iron Bowl in 2013 is the greatest college football game I've ever seen. And there were just a million reasons to think that. But for example, it was back and forth, and A.J. McCarron hit Amari Cooper with a 99-yard touchdown to open the fourth quarter. Anyway, it's back and forth and back and forth. And Sammy Coates got a touchdown to tie it up with 37 seconds left. So it's 28-28. And here comes Alabama. And T.J. Yeldon ultimately runs over to the left, and he steps out of bounds. And the referee was a fellow named Matt Austin. And Matt and I have become really good friends, and we've chatted about this several times. Did his foot hit the ground with no time left or 1 second left? And so Craig Silver, our producer, is telling me and Gary, vamp, because what they were trying to do is coordinate the end zone camera with the main game camera and put them together. It took them 7 minutes. And finally, they decided that, and Matt Austin very, very famously said, put 1 second back on the clock. Well, Nick Saban was really irritated with his senior place kicker, who was 1 for 4 and had 1 blocked. And so we thought they'd, throw a Hail Mary. But they sent this redshirt freshman out and tried a 57-yard field goal. And I've seen the replay 1,000 times. Back over my shoulder back here, I've got an autograph of a big, huge copy of Chris Davis, who was a guy in the end zone and 9 yards deep, and he caught it. And it was just absolute brilliance. So he comes left and he gets a couple blocks. And then when he's about the 35-yard line, it's pretty obvious that unless he stumbles and falls, he's going to score. So when he went in, I said, no flags. And then I said what I said about an answered prayer. And I looked back and I thought to myself, dear God, don't let there be any flags. And there weren't. And so we let the crowd, just thunderous crowd noise and people spilling on the field. And then I said, it might be worth another look. And so when you watch it again, there's a segment where Gary and I just shut up, and our director is Steve Milton. He still does all of our college football game. and so does Craig Silver. They're still together in the truck. And Steve, for a minute and 21 seconds, just conducted a symphony: a wide shot, tight shot, medium shot, crowd shot, reaction shot. And I've seen it like it's kind of like the Saturday Night Live thing. I replay it in all the speeches I do, and I just marvel at Steve's ability. Tracy Wolfson was our sideline reporter, and she almost got cold cocked in the mob coming over. And the SID at Auburn at the time was a guy named Kirk Sampson, and he saw this thing and he pushed it. There was a platform of some sort, pushed it away from Tracy's head. But it's still the greatest college football game I have ever seen. Still, and the replay. Gary says, because they had their field goal protection team, Alabama did, on the field, and so, and when Chris Davis went in the end zone, Gary said, "Well, no wonder they couldn't catch him. They had nothing but fat guys."
I admittedly just watched that video again yesterday. It's unbelievable. And you talk about the visual symphony after the touchdown, but we haven't nerded out too much on broadcasting tactics and things like that. But I was always amazed with your ability, especially on that call and a lot of your other calls, but in this call specifically, to maintain control and tempo in your call. Your call was like an audio symphony. Your call was like on beat, Chris Davis, no flags, touchdown Auburn, and the answer. It was very like you could put a metronome to it. Whereas, everybody has their own style. There's a Gus Johnson version of that call that I don't know what it would have sounded like. And but how did you, is that something?
Can you tell I'm not a fan? There are hollerers and there are hollers.
Yeah, that would have, but was that something you were cognizant of, like maintaining control through a call?
No, I think it's, I'm sure we're going to talk about Tiger ultimately and the chip shot and Jack. And I think 35 years ago, I would have jumped all over it. I think it's discipline and realizing the impact of silence, of just shutting up. One of the greatest examples, when we shut up for minute 21, right? When Rory won the Masters, Jim Nantz and Trevor Immelman exercised more discipline than I have ever seen in my life. They didn't say a word for almost 6.5 minutes. And for guys who talk for a living, it was uncanny. And it was so effective. Just be quiet. You got the best technical and production people in the business, and let them do their job.
Maybe they had your buddy Scott Hamilton grabbing their arm on the side, saying,
"They just
time moment."
Yeah, that's right.
Verne, before we again, we've allotted more. You've allotted us more time than we asked for, so we are gracious. We're going to wrap up in a little bit here, but before we get to the Masters and golf and stuff, of all the sports you have done, do you have a favorite?
Football or golf. It's a toss-up. I think I felt more comfortable doing football because I'd grown up with the sport. I was a failed athlete, but I knew that early on, but I learned I could write about it and talk about it, and so I grew up around football. I'm gonna date myself here, but I had two heroes when I was a young man. One was a Doak Walker, who lived here in Steamboat Springs, and the other was Darrell Royal. And my first job ever came when I was 23 years old in Austin, my hometown, and Coach Royal was the head coach. And I'm a whippersnapper, and I got to know Coach Royal and his late wife Edith, and I loved the man. And we became really. I actually got to work for them one year at ABC in 1980 after he'd retired. But he was one of the greatest men I've ever known. And so Doak was one. And by the way, the owner of the television station by whom I was hired, was President Johnson. It was really his wife, Lady Bird, who had the money. But I worked for LBJ for 3 years and got to know him superficially. But I was lucky enough to meet the man and his wonderful, wonderful wife. And I knew both daughters, Linda, and I knew both daughters. Short-term memory loss. Anyway,
Okay.
Linda Robb, I'm sorry, and Lucy. I'll tell you a funny story about LBJ. I'm doing the Cowboys early in my career, and I'm pre and post game, right? And they're playing the 49ers at Texas Stadium for the right to go to the Super Bowl. And President Johnson came, and after the Cowboys won, I'm in the locker room doing the post game show, and his then son-in-law, who was married to Lucy, was a guy named Pat Nugent, and Pat and I had become friends. So President Johnson and the whole Secret Service, the whole armada of people comes in. He goes back, talks to Coach Landry, talks to Roger, Walt Garrison, on and on and on. And as he's coming out, I'm on the air, and Pat Nugent looked at me and pointed at the president, and he said, "Do you want him here?" I said, "Oh my gosh, yes." So here came LBJ, and I said, "Mr. President, did you enjoy the game?" And he said, and I'm working in Dallas now, right? And he said, "Well, now, Verne, I'm not that big of a sports fan, but I think it's important for the state that the Cowboys won. So I wanted to congratulate Coach Landry and Mr. Staubach and Mr. Walt Garrison, all the rest of them on the victory. And as for you, young man, if things don't work out for you here in Dallas, I want you to know we've always got a place for you back in Austin."
Wow.
Oh, man.
That's pretty cool.
I would say so.
That's pretty cool. That's great.
Wow.
Greg, I'm going to let you start off the golf because Greg is by far the better golfer and the more in tune with golf than I am. So I'm going to let you lead that one off.
Yeah, I mean, there is a reason why we put this. We wanted to close with golf, so it's your time at CBS with golf, and it just, I almost just want to just let you cook here, but I know we'll probably start with just how you got started, but jump right into 1986, which really needs no introduction.
Well, in what year was it? 82. I had made the switch to CBS, and things had gone reasonably well. And I got a call December 1st of 1982 from New York, and the director of personnel was a lady named Susan Arani, and she said, our executive producer of golf, Frank Chirkinian, likes your work on football. He wants to know if you've ever done golf. And I said, I've done probably 10 events at ABC. And she said, good, he's going to call you. So Frank called me the next day, and we called him the Ayatollah, partly out of respect, but mostly out of fear. He's the single most profane human being I have ever met in my life. And he said, Lundquist, he said, here are your assignments. I like your work. But we're going to put you on Pebble Beach. You're going to work Jack's tournament in Dublin, Ohio. You're going to work Colonial. You're going to work the Byron Nelson. And you're going to work Augusta. Well, knock me over. And he said, but I don't want you going into a high-profile event like Pebble Beach without being introduced to our crew. So I want you to come to Phoenix and do the Phoenix Open because we're on opposite the Super Bowl. And so you'll get to work with our guys and nobody will ever watch it. So Nance and I flew out to Phoenix. And I just felt like if I can do this, this would be a really significant event in my professional career. And so Frank called me. He said, "This is a Wednesday, and we didn't do we didn't do cable in those days." And so I walked in a cabin, temporary office thing, and I said, "I'm here to see Mr. Kerrigan." And the secretary said, "He's back there, just knocking the door." So I knocked on the door. He said, "Come in." I said, "Frank, I'm Verne Lundquist." He said, "I know who the F you are. Who do you think effing hired you for, God?" I said, "Oh, okay. Sit down. We got 3 rules. You follow the rules, you're going to get along with us great. Number 1, no names. I don't want you to ever say, 'I'm Verne Lundquist at the 16th hole.' When it's appropriate at the beginning of the program, Pat Summerall will introduce you. Then never again. No names." I said, "Okay. Don't ever talk over a shot. Whatever brilliant addition to this editorial content you've got of this telecast, you make sure you put a period and a paragraph to it before the golfer takes the club by. And don't you ever call a shot in the air. Wait until it lands. More careers have been ruined by guessing wrong. Okay? Don't take your name. Don't talk over a shot. Shut up till it lands." And he said, "Third and most important, never state the obvious. If a guy makes a 2-foot putt, you damn well better not say, 'He made it.'" We got 65 people out here who can document that. Tell me something I can't see. So, okay, I've got the list memorized, and we come on the air on Saturday, and Rex Caldwell, a guy from Idaho, is on the 16th hole. Here's Caldwell. He's 2 back with 3 to play Saturday afternoon, and he's got a 7-iron. He hits it. I shut up. Comes down. He's 20 feet above the hole. Hole location is front right. If he can birdie the hole, he'll be only 1 back with 2 to play here on Saturday. We go away. We come back. Caldwell lags the putt up. I said, "Well, he's got 2.5 feet left for par, and if he can make that, he'll be only 2 back with 2 to play here on Saturday." We go away. We come back. Here's Caldwell for par. He never touched the hole. I said, "He missed it." Kerrigan pushed down the all key so everybody can hear him. And he said, "You stupid Scandinavian SOB. If I tell you, don't tell me he made it. Can you not deduce on your own to never tell me he missed it?" I never did it again.
Unbelievable.
Never did it again.
And that's still they still adhere to the don't talk over a shot, right?
Yeah. I mean, just shut up, lay out.
Yeah. So 86, which, by the way, you can actually watch on YouTube the full entire 3-hour long telecast. I may have done that. I didn't do it recently, but I may have done it over time a few months ago. And
wow.
It's truly unbelievable on so many levels. So yeah. I'm just real quick, I know you got plenty to talk about on that, but first of all, the lineup of announcers is, a who's who of all-time famous announcers. You had Musburger and Butler Cabin. You had Pat Summerall on 18. You had yourself on 17. You had a young kid named Jim Nance on 16. Ben Wright on 15. Let's see. McCord on 14. Ken Venturi on 13.
Yep.
And then I'm going to miss the rest of them, but it was unbelievable. And when they went through,
Bob Murphy was on 10.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when they went through and announced all those, it was unbelievable.
Well, it really was. And again, there's so many side stories to that day. But most importantly, I'll tell you the whole story. What the heck? We got nothing but time, right? Our associate producer was a fellow named Lance Barrow, large man. his nickname was Buddha. And so he sits on the second row of the truck. Frank Jerkinian, the Ayatollah, is on the front row. And Frank was producing and directing at that time. So Jack plays a very mundane. He started 4 shots back. He's still 4. He plays through the 8th. And we didn't televise the front 9 then, but we did pick up coverage at the 9th hole. And so Jack birdies 9, and Lance Buddha says to Frank, I've got Jack Nicklaus with a birdie on the 9th. And Frank stood up, turned around, and glared at him. He said, Buddha, we're storytellers here, and Jack Nicklaus is not a part of this story. Now leave me alone. So turns around, Jack birdies 10. Buddha says, Frank, we got Jack with a birdie on 10. Frank just stood up and glared at him. He birdies 11. Frank, Jack just had his 3rd birdie in a row. All right. So we went back and played all 3 in succession. Well, I guarantee you, we didn't miss a step that Jack took on Augusta on the second 9 after that.
Yeah, because I mean, in watching that too, when they were doing the intros and talking about everything and who's in contention, they probably mentioned 10, 12 golfers. And I can attest to that. Jack was never mentioned once. No. He wasn't even on the first 3 pages of the leaderboard when you guys went on the air, which is truly, crazy.
There's kind of a backstory. A writer named Tom McAllister wrote for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And he wrote a column on Tuesday. And he listed the golfers, and in the lower quadrant of guys who could potentially win was Jack. And he was saying, Jack and Barbara were staying with a friend of theirs, and Jack Grout, he was one of his teachers, and he put that column on the refrigerator drawer. So Jack saw that every morning when he went to the golf course. But ultimately, and Nance had a great call. At 16, Jack the second was on the bag with his dad, right? And at 16, Jack hit his tee shot, a 5-iron, tells you something about how old it was. And he never looked up, and Jack the second said, be good, and Jack said, it is. And he almost aced it. And then that's when he did birdie the hole, Jim Nance said, the bear has come out of hibernation. Great call. And he's 26 years old, by the way. And so when he came to 17, Seve Ballesteros, who had the lead, had double bogeyed 15. So now all of a sudden, Nicklaus is tied for the lead at the age of 46. And he pulled his tee shot way left. And then he hit a 9-iron, and he's 12 feet from the hole. And as he's walking up, I thought to myself, if he makes this, state the obvious, right? He's going to be the leader. Just shut it. Say what you're going to say and get out of the way and be quiet. And so the ball's about this far, and I boldly proclaimed, maybe. Well, no kidding, maybe. and he made it. And I said, yes, sir. And then I shut up. And Jack, 2 guys, Greg Norman and Tom Kite, both had a chance to tie him. Tom missed an 8-foot uphill putt at 18 to force a tie, and Norman hit a 4-iron up on the hill to the right and double bogeyed the hole. So Jack, at the age of 46, wins. And when Nancy and I were at Augusta a year and a half ago, at 2024, I mean, again, I've got a picture back here of Jack with a putter up and yes, sir, and a smiley face. I treasured that. And we were at Augusta a year and a half ago, and Jack and Barbara and Nancy and I, we ran into him. And I've got a video on my phone of Jack said, okay, somebody videotape this on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. And we both went, yes, sir. I treasure that. Promise you.
And just how the yes sir happened to sync up with him raising his hands
and I tried to talk to Jack about that, and I said he has no interest in looking back, right? I looked him up. And I said, Jack, it was like a downbeat. And yes, sir. He said, yeah, whatever.
That's one of those events too. I think people who were at the event, around the event. I'm sure I was watching, but I was 3 years old, so I don't really remember it. But and people still refer to that as really one of the truly greatest sporting events of any kind that they've ever been a part of.
Yeah, and I get asked all the time because I've been lucky to be at this for so long. Favorite moments? Well, Jack is up there, and I think it's because he's 5 months older than I am, and I tend to remind him every time I get a chance. Hey, old man.
So real quick, because you did mention doing, and when you said Dublin, Ohio, I'm talking to you from Dublin, Ohio. So Justin and I were just at the memorial a month ago, and we always go up there, and beautiful course, beautiful area. I know you probably worked your fair amount of memorial tournaments.
Yeah, I did.
Do you have any impressions from the course, the tournament, like any?
Well, I worked, I'll give you one, and it was probably 86, as a matter of fact. And I was working, I was working the 16th hole, the par 3. And this guy who was out of work, who's a brilliant guy, but God, he can talk. His name is Gary McCord. And McCord had not qualified to keep his card. So he caught it right, and he went to Frank Chirkinian, and he said, hey, I'm here. Can I be a runner or something like that? And Frank said, I'll tell you what, go up to 16, sit by Lundquist, and put a headset on. We'll try you out. And so Gary didn't understand the mechanics of television, and we were doing 16 and 12. Well, 12's a par 3, but you do it off the monitor. So Ray Floyd comes through 16, and we got nobody in front of us, but there is action at 12. And I said, meanwhile, at the 12th hole, and Gary's looking at me like, what the hell are you talking about? And so he didn't know, and but he learned quickly. And of course, Gary doesn't lay out when he should, and it cost him at Augusta in 1994. He was working 17 at Augusta, and very famously, he said two things that got him banned from Augusta. First of all, you don't make light of, and there's a swale behind the 17th hole, and Gary said somebody hit it down there. He said, you don't hit it down in that swale. There are body bags down there at Augusta. And then famously, and what got him tossed out was some guy had a 20-foot putt, and Gary said, they don't cut the greens here at Augusta. They just apply bikini wax.
Oh boy.
You're out. And so he got banned from Augusta. But he'll tell you now, getting banned from Augusta did more for his career than anything subsequent to that. So, yeah.
Greg, can I take it? I want to skip ahead to 2005. I think whether people watch golf regularly, don't watch golf at all, or kind of are in the middle, I think everyone knows the chip on 16 and your call. And can you just put us in that moment and describe what you were seeing on that Tiger Woods chip?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, it's been 20 years. Whew. And Tiger comes to the 16th, and he's playing with Chris DeMarco. And they're tied, and DeMarco he's got the honors. DeMarco hits it about 20 feet below the hole, and Tiger hooked an 8-iron and went long and left. And Lanny Watkins was our game analyst then in the tower with Nance, and he said, I said, Lanny, about the chip shot, what do you think? And he said, he'll be lucky to keep it inside DeMarco's ball because of the severe angle. So Tiger and I have talked about this since. He picked out a spot and he hit an 8-iron and he hit it, bounces once and backs up, and it was perfect. And then it starts to tumble down toward the hole. And I said, as it got, closer and closer, oh my goodness, there's something brilliant like that. And then it sat on the lip for 1.8 seconds. And in 2005 dollars, advertising age estimated the accrued value to Nike for that 1.8 seconds was $19 million. And then it tumbled in. And I said, in your life, have you ever seen anything like that? Because in my life, I never had. And I think I was expressing what people at home were thinking or feeling at that time. And Tiger, he and I, in 2024, I had three goals I wanted to accomplish because I knew it was going to be my last. I wanted to meet Scotty Scheffler. I'd never done that. I did that on Tuesday night. I wanted to see Jack. I did that with Jack and Barbara. And I wanted to thank Tiger. And so when he made the cut, I went to his agent, Mark Steinberg, and I said, I really want to thank him. He said, when he plays 15, get down. And I was no longer in the big tower behind because I've had 2 really serious back surgeries. And so for 4 years prior to that, I'd done 16 and 6 from the content center. We used to call it the compound, but now it's a content center. And but I was determined to get back and do it on the course. And so there are 20 steps up behind the 16th, but on the flanker tower, there are only 6. And so on Saturday and Sunday, I was able to be back on the golf course. And Mark said, when he's playing 15, just make sure you're down there when he makes the turn at 16. And so he was way out of contention, and we weren't televising him at all. So I was waiting down below, and someone captured the moment. I said, Tiger, and he came over and we shook hands. And I said, thank you for what you meant to me professionally, but also personally. And he said, you're more than welcome. He went up to 16. And there are 2 versions of that handshake. One was behind us and it shows the handshake, but somebody else in the more prominent one is across, and it looks like he's shaking hands with a tree. Well, he went on the Jimmy Fallon show. He's got a new line of clothing. And on Monday night, Fallon didn't want to talk about the handshake. He just wanted, who the hell was behind that tree? and so, but I did get a chance. I accomplished all 3. I got to meet Tiger. I thanked Tiger, got to see Jack, and I got to meet Scotty. So I could check off the list.
And you became what we like to call an internet meme.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
On the one quick question, I've always wanted to ask you this on the in your life call, or you're such a modest man, so this is going to probably make you a little uncomfortable because I know you don't like to praise yourself. But did you on that call especially, but I guess any call, did you ever make a call and just even to yourself after you did it, be like, man, I nailed that?
Well, I think of any call I made, that would come as close as any. Yeah, because what I was expressing was what I thought people at home were thinking. In my life, I've never seen anything like that. And I never had. And I was reacting as a person in their living room. In my life, I've never seen anything like that. And it was the perfect shot. And I think what I had to say accentuated it. So, yeah, I'm, modestly, he said, blushing. No, but I'm very proud of that one. I really am. But I'm equally as proud of Jack. I mean, and, you know, whoever does this sort of thing has ranked the calls at Augusta. And I get number one, number two on a lot of those things. Well, pardono me, you know, there were. I mean, think about this. It was Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods. It wasn't Colin. It wasn't Chris DeMarco.
Yeah.
And then in '05, remember, Tiger bogeyed 17, bogeyed 18, and had to win it in a playoff. And had he not won, I think it would still be a pretty good call, but we wouldn't think of it in the same context.
That's very true.
I mean, you are woven into the fabric. Tiger, Jack. I mean, the Duke shot with Christian Laettner, you know, all the football calls, and not to mention Happy Gilmore, too. So you are right there in the fabric of American society for a long, long, long time to come.
Hey, I know Post Malone. Tell me. By the way, it's everything I know about the movie. It's going to be fantastic. I can't wait to see it. I just can't wait.
Well, we'll definitely be tuning in.
For sure. Now, Verne, before we let you go, obviously you have, you know, throughout your stories, you've mentioned your wife, Nancy, and how she has traveled along. And, you know, a lot of times you need that person in your job, in your life, that's by your side, or, you know, there for the good days, for the bad days, whatever it might be. You want to tell us a little bit about your wife, Nancy?
Yeah, I sure will. I'd love to do that. And in all candor, Nancy and I, this was our third at bat. She was married and divorced twice. So was I. My dad, the Lutheran minister, he married me the first time. Huge church wedding, didn't work out. Second time, more modest wedding, didn't work out. So I went to my father, the Lutheran minister, and I said, after a couple of years, Nancy and I were both very, very careful. And we both did premarital counseling to make sure we were making the right. So I went to my dad and I said, Pop, after 2 years now, Nancy and I are going to get married. Would you do the honors? And he looked at me, a little bit of a smile, and he said, okay, but this is the last damn time. So we listened very carefully. But we've been married 43 years. I love her more today than I did when we first met. And we met in Dallas and in 1980. And because of our backgrounds, we waited a couple of years. And so we finished. And ironically, who knew, we got married in April 8th, little knowing that it was going to impact us because it was the week of Augusta. And so, but 43 and counting, she's a treasure. She's got the greatest sense of humor, and she's got the greatest smile I've ever seen in my life. We met in an upscale bar. It was a bar, but I hasten to add it was upscale. And she had a blind date, and somehow, God bless him, he had to go to the bathroom, and he was talking about he said, I know you're recently divorced. I don't want you hanging around singles bars. So on Thursday night, can you get off between the 6 and 10? We'll take you out to a nice restaurant in Dallas. He looks at Nancy, he said, what are you doing Thursday? She said, nothing. And so we arranged that. And so finally this guy, who was the Coors beer distributor in Dallas, Fort Worth, he had to go to the bathroom. And I said, would you like to dance? We're on the dance floor. And I said, how long have you and Raymond been together? She said, first date, blind date. I said, well, then forget what he's talking about Thursday. What are you doing on Saturday night? And shameless hussy that she is, she said, I think I'm doing whatever you're doing.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
That's great.
Amazing.
That's great.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jason.
No, I just I'm sure Greg's got a couple more questions, but I do want to wrap up in a minute to be respectful of your time. But just for anyone that wants to eventually maybe not be the next Verne Lundquist, but be their own version of them, or wants to get into sports broadcasting, or just get into journalism in general, what sort of advice would you give someone that wants to break into your career field?
Never turn anything down. First of all, and you're not going to start out as a sports center anchor. Okay, you're going to start in Wichita, but not Wichita Falls, and and learn. But first of all, learn the rules and learn the jargon of whatever sport you're doing, and then learn to shut up. But one of my mentors, tragically, he only lived till he's 51 years of age, was Frank Lieber. And Frank taught me that. Learn the rules, learn the jargon, and then be open to anything. If they say do figure skating, do figure skating. If they say do archery, do archery. If they want you to do weightlifting, learn the rules, learn the jargon, and then be open to doing it. And I was lucky enough to get a chance to broaden my horizons. Ironically, the figure skating event, I mean, it became so significant, not just because of Nancy and Tonya, but Scott and I, we did 3. Albertville, France, Lillehammer, and Nagano, Japan. And we became lifelong friends. I call him Chihuahua. Scott is 5'3", and he had an illness when he was a young boy. His mother and dad, he was adopted by 2 professors at Bowling Green University. And he lost his mom fairly early on, and he lost his dad an hour before we did the final in Lillehammer with Nancy. Yeah. And he said, let me go. But he knew his dad was ill. And Scott, well, maybe an hour and a half before, he said, let me just go walk and come back and I'll be fine. And I videotape everything. And I was videotaping Scott in what turned out to be his final conversation with Ernie, his dad. And Scott is just one of the most decent. I've seen him skate in Madison Square Garden. And I've seen he's so charismatic that with 18,000 people in the stand, he's got this charisma that can reach up and grab somebody in the top row. And he's a brilliant, he's a brilliant guy. And I call him Chihuahua. And he called me Jen K. Parle, dog who talks. You know where I got that? I was working with Don Drysdale. And Don was doing the Rangers, and we were spring training in Pompano Beach. And Don said, Lundquist, keep this in mind. At the end of the day, we ain't nothing but talking dogs. Chien K. Parle. And which means you're beholden to people above you who will make decisions about your career, and they're subjective. You can't go in and say, I sold so many cars, or I sold so many policies. It's subjective. And you got to just, it's a roller coaster.
Well, Verne, I can tell you, Greg and I have probably quoted you out in public on just random things we've seen in life. Oh my gracious. Oh, goodness, just in your life, stuff like that. And so you are forever, like, just meeting you now today. We appreciate your time. But, again, I think I can speak for a lot of people that we feel like, we have known you for a long time. And, I know you got that nickname Uncle Verne, and that's what you feel like to us. And just on behalf of me and our show, I want to say thank you for taking the time. You've given us way more time than we asked for, and we are so appreciative. And I'm going to just turn it over to Greg for any last words he might have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've idolized you for as long as I can remember. So this has meant a tremendous amount. And now I can say you're a gentleman above all, which I knew would be the case. But, when you meet somebody that you've looked up to, really, you hope that they live up to what you've built them up to be, but you also hope that you've done them justice. You have lived up to anything I could possibly expect and more. Again, thank you so much. This is something that I personally, and I know Justin will cherish for our whole lives, because this is really special. So thank you. We wish you and Nancy the best of health, happiness, and enjoyment in your retirement.
Greg and Justin, thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much, guys. You allowed me to walk down memory lane, and most of it is good. It sure is.
Absolutely.
But when you agreed to do this, I even put the meme of you out there and be like, who the hell is the 330 Sports Show? So, once again, Verne, as Greg said, you are a true gentleman and a legend behind the mic, and a great human being. We appreciate you, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed being with you.